very good morning to you. Welcome to Business Morning. I am Bisi Adebayo. President Muhammadu Buhari is seeking the approval of the National Assembly for an external loan of $5.513 billion. Now, this loan is to finance the revised 2020 budget, priority projects of the federal government on COVID-19, and support for state governments. The facilities being arranged comprise the International Monetary Fund's $3.4 billion, the World Bank's $1.5 billion, $500 million from the African Development Bank, and $113 million from the Islamic Development Bank. Meanwhile, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria yesterday trimmed the benchmark lending rate by 100 basis points from 13.5% to 12.5%. And according to the CBN Governor, Godwin Emefiele, this was a unanimous decision taken by 10 members of the committee in attendance at the meeting. The Emefiele-led committee also believes that a sharp decline in output growth is expected in the second and third quarters of the year, but a reverse to positive growth by the fourth quarter is certain. But the CBN's optimism would actually depend on proper implementation of the current stimulus initiatives to prevent Nigeria from sliding into another recession. Well, let's get a sense of what analysts are saying about this very decision of the central bank and the federal government's loan request to fund the budget from the head of portfolio management at Commercial Partners Asset Management, Victor Louis, who joins us from Lekki here in Lagos via Skype. Good morning, Victor. Well, let's begin our conversation with the external loan request by the president to fund the budget. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding over the letter to the Senate that the president is asking for a fresh loan. Is it really a fresh loan?
No, it's not. It's not fresh. So clearly, the budget for 2020, obviously because of the whole COVID-19 pandemic, had essentially been revised downwards. So upon the revision, that revised budget proposition has essentially been forwarded to the National Assembly for approval. So that's what we're having. So it's not a fresh loan. The budget deficits of about 5.3 trillion would essentially be funded by both local and foreign borrowings, and essentially the foreign borrowings will be from multilateral lenders, like you mentioned earlier, from the IMF, the World Bank, the AFDB, the Islamic Development Bank, and also from the Brazil Exim Bank as well. So it's not a fresh borrowing. It's basically on the back of the adjusted, 2020 budget proposition.
Victor, this week has been full of surprises coming from the GDP numbers to the capital importation data, and now the CBN's reversal of the MPR or reducing the MPR by 100 basis points. I bet you didn't see that coming, did you?
Well, I mean, it was a widely, surprising move on the back of on the part of the Apex Bank and the committee, really. But I think that what the committee has done basically is to signal its intent to support, growth, to support, the sort of fragile growth that we're looking to see, and even, tame output growth. So I think what the, committee has done is to signal its intent, to support growth by cutting those rates. I think the question really is around, the potency of that benchmark rate, and, clearly the transmission mechanism is not as efficient, as you would have in other clients. So the question really is around how potent that drop would be on overall lending, in the economy, really.
But what sort of synergy have you seen between the monetary policy and the fiscal policy?
I think that's a critical part of the equation. It's extremely important that there is great synergy between the monetary and the fiscal authorities. The monetary authorities have done, quite a lot, and it's important that, the fiscal side of things, complements, whatever efforts that the monetary aspect is putting in to ensure that, the economy is able to ward off whatever potential recession we're likely to face, or whatever, potential slow growth, we're likely to face down the road. So obviously, the, adjustment of the budget numbers is certainly part of, what the fiscal side is doing to realign, its policy with monetary policy to ensure that the economy is essentially on the right path.
To what extent will the MPC decision complement the economic recovery and growth plan?
Well, again, I think the question really is around, how potent really that, benchmark rate is. we've had times when, that rate was in single digits, and that didn't really, impact, lending rates, and that did not really spur or engender any significant, credit growth to spur, growth for the broader economy. So that really is the question. There are other, tools that the Apex Bank has been able to use to try and, get banks to lend and to basically reflate the economy, if you will. But the potency of the benchmark rate has been in question for quite some time now. So moving on that, was where, a lot of people were surprised about. So it really remains to be seen how that will pan out. But, going from evidence that we have, so far, that has not proved to support, outputs or economic growth.
How do you see the monetary policy responses impacting portfolio investment?
Well, in terms of, portfolio investments and across markets, really, I think what is basically happening, in my view, is the benchmark rate is essentially sort of playing catch up now, because we've seen, treasury yields decline quite significantly. We've also seen the same for bond yields as well. So at the long end, you're seeing bond yields around, 12.5 thereabouts. So dropping the rates to that level is basically, having that rate sort of, play catch up, and that's a rate that should essentially anchor, how things move within those markets. But of course, there are several idiosyncrasies, within the market that, sort of like ensure that, these yields move in the way that they do. So it's really, for me, tough to see what the impact would be. I don't think it will be anything significant. What you're likely to see is maybe some, slow reaction, really, but I don't see that it would significantly impact, our portfolio arrangements and what is going on with the fixed income and even equities markets as well.
Head of Portfolio Management at Commercial Partners Asset Management, Victor Louis, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about oil prices now. They actually edged lower today after U.S. inventory data showed lackluster fuel demand in the world's largest oil consumer, while worsening U.S.-China tensions weighed on global financial markets. Brent crude slipped 0.7% to $35.04 a barrel in early trade, and U.S. WTI was at $33.18 a barrel. But despite the losses, both contracts are set for a fifth weekly gain, and that's helped by production cuts and optimism about demand recovery in other countries. Looking ahead now, traders will be focusing on the outcome of talks on output cuts between OPEC, or between members of OPEC Plus, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and allies, including Russia, in the second week of June. Of course, Saudi Arabia and some OPEC members are also considering extending record production cuts of 9.7 million barrels per day beyond June, but haven't won support yet from Russia. Now, for the first time in history, the COVID-19 pandemic has restricted about 90% of the world's citizens from traveling around the globe. Without a doubt, the most affected in travel and tourism is the aviation industry, with an estimated 25 million jobs and 100 million travel and tourism jobs across the globe at risk. The International Air Transport Association estimates that the industry will see its revenue shrink by 44% in 2020, while global GDP will only contract by approximately 3%. Joining me now to paint a better picture of how much harm COVID-19 has caused the aviation sector, particularly in Africa, is the regional head IATA for West Africa, Adefunke Adeyemi. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on Business Morning. Of course, the aviation sector is a major casualty of the COVID-19 pandemic and associated problems. Africa has been at the center of these losses, including airline bankruptcies and layoffs. Look at Ethiopian Airlines, for instance. That's the only profitable airline in Africa, and it has reported losses of up to $550 million in the first quarter. Now, do you think that there is a future for this critical industry after this dust settles?
Thank you very much for the question. Good morning, and good morning to our viewers. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. The aviation industry definitely has been one of the hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. And 94% of passenger traffic was down in Africa in the first quarter of this year. This is a significant amount, meaning that no one was flying. The only flights that were happening were for essential services and for medicines to get across the continent. Globally, we estimate that the industry will take a hit of about $400 billion this year, $400 billion US dollars. For African aviation, we're estimating $6 billion loss in revenue to the airlines, as well as a negative impact of $28.5 billion to African economies' GDP, as well as putting 3 million jobs at risk. So this is a really critical situation and what people could call a perfect storm. However, aviation is a critical enabler for economies. Modern society really had not been able to function as effectively as it could have until aviation developed. And we've seen the actual impact through the closures of countries and borders as a result of this COVID-19. It has meant that the world became quite fragmented again, with everyone confined to their own spaces. Whereas before that, aviation allowed the freedom for people to move around easily for different reasons that impact all of us in modern society today: to work, to trade, to do business, to learn, for medical aid, for medicines, to get across to remote areas, humanitarian efforts, etc. So it really is a critical aspect of life. And we are optimistic that we're going to see the aviation industry return post this crisis as soon as possible as well, because that is really essential to ensuring that the world is connected again.
Well, with its huge losses now, what can African countries do to boost the competitiveness of the region as an aviation market? I'm saying this because Africa is home to about 1.3 billion people, which is about 18% of the global population of 7.2 billion.
Yes, absolutely right. So you mentioned earlier on that, there are huge losses being recorded, and I already gave you some numbers about what some of those losses are for African airlines. But specifically, we're seeing some of these airlines start to get severely impacted. And in terms of competitiveness, African airlines were struggling anyway for many reasons. One, the policy underpinnings of African aviation, which doesn't see the continent as connected as it can be. So the single African air transport market, not yet coming into full implementation, created a challenge for competitiveness. Another issue is high taxes and charges that the industry has faced across different players. And it's easy, to put a tax on a ticket is relatively easy because you can collect those taxes easier than other modes of surcharging. And so aviation was always a bit of a target, particularly for African markets. But the news that I want to give for African aviation and for African people is that Africa is a huge continent. You can fit the USA, China, Mexico, Europe, and a few other countries into the landmass of Africa. And so Africa creates an opportunity for aviation to be a leapfrogging catalyst for its integration and its development. And so there are several areas where opportunities are for African governments at this moment in time to seize on the lull that we have seen from the pandemic to begin to redirect the aviation industry and to see how best we can make it work for us as African people.
With some of these challenges you have talked about now, putting that together with COVID-19, of course, the effects of COVID-19, do you think that more carriers will fold up and file for protection?
Yes, so let me just give you a few examples of those that have already done so. Air Mauritius filed for voluntary administration. South African Airways and South African Express are already in business rescue currently by the South African government. Air, which is another strong carrier in the South African economy, has also ceased trading. And a few other airlines across Africa are in severe financial crisis. So we expect, analysis shows that if before the end of June, the airlines don't get any direct support in terms of cash injections for liquidity purposes to support their working capital requirements, as well as to help pay off some debt obligations. Our analysis shows that 50% of airlines globally will go into insolvency. And if there's no relief by the end of July, our analysis shows that it will be 90%. So this is really, really serious.
Yes, indeed. With your illustrations now, it's clear that African carriers, and especially in West Africa, are actually in the financial pits. But do you think that support from the World Bank, the IMF, and even the AFDB, for instance, can help restore some stability to the sector and the region?
Absolutely. So all kinds of support at this moment in time for the airline are necessary and are urgently needed. We wrote a joint letter, a joint relief appeal to international donor organizations, we being IATA, the United Nations World Tourism Organization, the World Travel and Tourism Council, the African Airlines Association, and the Association of Airlines for Southern Africa. We wrote a combined letter to these about 12 international donor institutions to engage with them, seeking for an aid of $10 billion to the travel and tourism industry. That is our estimate of what is needed in this period of time, at least to carry over the industry, not just the airlines, but all of the businesses that support aviation business and support economies to grow. So yes, definitely, we're any support that we can get from these organizations would be most useful. The only caveat there, though, is that there is such a thing as too much debt, and already the industry is starting to be strangled by the debt that's coming, particularly from relief. And we're already seeing that we have higher percentages of debt now compared to January of this year. And so our only appeal here is that the debt should be given in a way that does not create an unbearable debt burden to the airlines, and should be customized and targeted to each airline's specific circumstances.
As some economies begin their slow start to recovery now, passengers are reluctant to fly. Of course, that's because of fear, anxiety, and tight budgets, as well as the whole idea of being served by air stewards wearing masks and gloves being the new normal. But how do you think the airlines will respond to this situation?
So the airline industry is already being quite proactive on this point, understanding that continued closure of borders and as a result of that, continued grounding of the aviation industry negatively impacts economies, because aviation contributes so much to the world's economies. We contribute 2.7 trillion to the global economy, and world trade by value is 35% carried by aviation. So we're quite critical to ensuring that economies continue to grow around. And so we've been quite proactive with trying to ensure that the industry can restart as safely and securely as possible, until such a time as there is medication to either treat or cure the COVID-19 crisis. I think it goes without saying that we expect it to be with us for some time to come. But what we have done is looked at ways and measures in which we can ensure that as much as possible, there is safety through the end-to-end passenger journey process. And we're working not just as IATA, but we're working with the international community, with the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, with the World Health Organization, WHO, and with other players to ensure that we come up with a minimum set of guidelines that will support what we're calling these biosecurity measures. If you remember, under 9/11, there were several measures that were implemented after those attacks happened, and many of those we still see in place today. So what we're recommending is a set of measures, most of which will be temporary until once there is a cure and medication. And these measures are important to be able to give the government confidence to open again, as well as to give the passengers the confidence to fly again. And some of these measures, really look at that end-to-end journey. So we take into account what happens as soon as passengers come into the airport environment. So things like temperature screening, making sure that the staff are adequately trained, that the environment is duly sanitized and is kept in a sanitary condition throughout that process, ensuring social distancing at critical passenger touch points like check-in, security, boarding, ensuring that passengers wear masks as much as possible to limit the spread of any of the virus, and so on. So these are some of those measures which have been published and which were released by IATA on the 19th of May. We are also glad that the international collaborative effort that is ongoing will see a release of these global measures that I mentioned next Monday from the 1st of June. There will be something that passengers and all governments can rely on because it's been worked on, in a coordinated, joined up manner.
Would like to thank you, Regional Head IATA for West Africa, Adefunke Adeyemi, for sharing your thoughts with us on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're still dwelling on the aviation sector, but with a focus on Nigeria when we return in just a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Now, back home in Nigeria, most of the local airlines have either forced their workers to embark on unpaid leave, slash salaries, or even dismiss their workforce. And the question is, will Nigeria ever fly again? Well, joining me to look at this is IATA's regional rep for West Africa and Central Africa, Dr. Samson Fatuku. Good morning, Dr. Fatuku. Thanks for joining us on the program. Now, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, most Nigerian airlines were insolvent and already running at a loss, having complained about multiple taxes, levies, and infrastructure difficulties. How would you react to all of this?
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. The Nigerian carriers have been really providing service in challenging environment, business challenging environment, and the operation encountering a lot of challenges, and also some internal difficulties with regard to the corporate and the management of the airlines. Let me first of all start with the business environment. The airline have been complaining of arbitrary and excessive charges. And so the ticket price have been impacted by those charges. It is true that the ticket price is a direct component of the fare that is presented to the passenger. So the higher the charges, the higher the fare, and the lower the demand for travel. And that takes travel out of the reach of a good proportion of the passengers, lowering the load factors of the airline. And we have seen airlines at times having to discount their own part of the fare in order to accommodate the charges, because demand for travel is not forever priced in a state. So, and then in order to ramp up their load factors, they are discounted, and that goes directly on their bottom line. But the problem of the local carrier is not limited to charges, but they also have operational challenges. And then we know that in Nigeria, our carriers, for example, are recording the aircraft utilization, how much they use their aircraft in a day, about 6 to 7 hours in a day. That is the aircraft utilization that they record here in Nigeria. But the same aircraft in other environments can be used for 13 and 14 hours. Now, with that reduction in aircraft utilization, the revenue that comes to the airline is reduced because they cannot use their aircraft to the maximum. And why? Because some of our airports VFR, that's the visual flight rules environment that they have to see. Once it becomes dark, the airports are closed. So they cannot use the aircraft for those airports. Now, the issue is not only about that VFR issue. We have seen several times, for example, during the Harmattan period, that the flights are grounded because of issues maybe with the navigation aid being adequate at those times. So the airline continues to lose money grounding aircraft at that time, while the cost of the aircraft keep on piling. The crew have to be paid, the lease of the aircraft has to be maintained, the aircraft are parked on ground. We have had also time when the airlines also, because of scarcity of aviation fuel, that are not flying. The aircraft are grounded on itself. And our airline also have difficulty in turning around their aircraft at the shortest possible time. So the quicker they turn their aircraft around, the more rotation they can cover, the more flight they can provide, the more revenue they can generate. So they have business challenges, operational challenges, and they also have their internal challenges with regard to the corporate governance, their business model, and their business practices.
Now, perhaps these issues or these challenges that you've talked about have affected local airlines such as Medview, for instance. Now, that's the only airline that is listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and it's been reporting losses. Of course, its stock has been suspended even before the COVID-19 pandemic. What advice do you have for policymakers and operators in Nigeria on how to survive this crisis and remain competitive?
Now, surviving this crisis demands adequate attention from the regulators and also the operators. With regard to the regulators, what we have been advocating is the direct intervention of government in the sector. The government cannot afford to allow airline and the aviation industry to die in Nigeria or to go totally comatose. So there need, we are advocating for that the government need to have a direct sector intervention so that the aviation industry can continue to be and play its role as a catalyst for the global economy and the whole economy in Nigeria. So government is to come out with a policy which support direct relief into the sector. If you have time in the program, like I gave you the type of palliative we are expecting from the government. So government support, government to make sure that the environment is conducive for the aviation industry to thrive. Now, on the operator side, we expect the operators to use this period that they are not flying to take stock. Now, this is the time for our carriers to look critically into their business model, to look into their business practices, to start thinking maybe it's a time to collaborate more, maybe it's a time to consolidate, maybe it's a time for them to have strategic partners that from within or outside the country that can help their business. And they need to take that time to review. And then the way that when they start flying again, they can be a beautiful bride for other carriers, for other partners to choose from. And this is a time of stock taking for the carriers. And I think they are doing that. This is what I expect them to do this time before they restart, review their business plan, review their operations, and see which way to go. Because it may not be business as usual when it will start either domestically, regionally, and internationally.
Now, while the airlines probably consider some of your recommendations, now Nigeria has reported a very low infection and fatality rate of coronavirus compared to some other parts of the world, and the airports have been closed for over 2 months now. What advice do you also have for policymakers to ensure passenger safety before opening the airports?
Yeah, safety is the #1 priority for IATA and the aviation industry. If there's no safety, there's no aviation industry. Safety, #1 priority. But how do we achieve that safety within this new system, within this new environment that we have, this COVID-19 environment? I had to roll out a document and a procedure called biosecurity roadmap to aviation restart. And that looks at different layers, proposing a multi-layer approach to the aviation for the biosecurity issue that we have with COVID-19. And then because we believe that there's no single one measure that can take care of all the challenges that come with COVID-19. So we need to have different measures. And I think my colleague Adefunke talks about that some minutes ago, where we had to look at temperature screening, put temperatures on top of temperature screening, the wearing of masks, the social distancing within the processing of the passengers. Looking at also at having smart boarding in order to avoid congregation of passengers, and look at also social distancing within the airport environment, and also looking at disinfecting the aircraft, deep disinfection of the aircraft cabin, and the constant cleaning and disinfecting of the common areas. So these are layers of measures that we think, and also with what we have in the aircraft cabin, that the EPA touch of economic environmental control system of the aircraft that allow us to purify the air of the aircraft, kill 99% of the germ in the aircraft. With all these layers of measures, we think that we can achieve the biosecurity requirement for aircraft to start. This is for the good of the passenger, primarily for the staff, who are flying the aircraft and taking care of and for the passengers, so and the operator. So it's a comprehensive approach in different layers of measures for the biosecurity of the flights and of our passengers.
Now, African airlines are mostly loss-making, and some policymakers are obsessed with national carriers, which were quite popular in the past. What's your view on the concept of national carriers? Can it work in Nigeria?
Well, it's a topical issue, and IATA has no position either for or against establishing a national carrier, because we have seen national carriers doing well. We have also seen national carriers failing. We have seen privately owned aircraft doing very well, and we have seen them also failing. Our emphasis and our advocacy is for having an environment, a business environment, regulatory environment, and operational environment that is conducive for the prosperity of an airline, be it domestic, be it private or national. So the issue is for us as a nation, Nigeria as a nation, to get the environment fundamentals for aviation right first. So when we have the fundamental right, so whichever airline comes in, either private or national airline, then we have an environment, an infrastructure outlay that allows them to prosper. So if we don't have, first of all, putting those blocks in place and having those fundamentals achieved, either we have a national carrier or a private carrier, then we go the same line of what you have seen now, that a high mortality rate of our airline and a very short lifespan of airline. We need to get the fundamental right first.
What do you see changing when eventually Nigerian airlines start flying?
What I see changing, first of all, is that I'm saying that airline will need to work hard with the government to bring back the confidence to fly. Many passengers may be afraid now that they don't want to be infected of the virus during the flying process. That is understandable, that is legitimate. And also organizations maybe like WHO and CDC or the government maybe also be afraid to say we will not get more contamination on board or during the flying process. So first of all is to deal with that with those concerns, and that's why we have the biosecurity approach that has been developed, and so that we can first of all address that fear within the flying public. Then after that, I see that the environment will change. The airport will not be the same as it is. The airport will be there as a building, but the space that will be used will change because of the social distancing requirement. They will not have those congregations anymore until the situation significantly improved. And then we have even more time where they to go through those processes. So if before, for example, for a flight, you are arriving at 2 hours before departure, then maybe you will need to arrive now 3 hours before departure, because now there's a new process in place. I'm going through the new process, and that will take more time. I see more time being required of the passengers to go through the processing, and also for the airline to turn around their aircraft to do their flight. So we see those changes coming in. But I see the airline also coming up supporting NCA's measures to be able to overcome these new challenges that you come here with.
IATA's regional rep for West Africa and Central Africa, Dr. Samson Fatuku. Thanks for speaking with us on Business Morning.
Thank you very much.
And let's now talk to Edidiong Uwang, who's ready to review yesterday's market activities for us. Good morning, Eddie. So we actually saw profit-taking return to the market yesterday. What happened?
Good morning, BC. Well, the bears finally showed up in the market yesterday, and that was expected given all the gains we've seen in previous trading sessions. And that was due to investors taking profit on most Tier 1 banking stocks. The all-share index declined by 0.22% to 25,166.01 points. That brought the month-to-date return to 9.56%, as the year-to-date losses rose marginally to minus 6.04%. Now, the market lost 29 billion naira yesterday, and that reduced the exit cap to 13.115 trillion naira. Total volume dipped by about 40% to 348.21 million units, worth 3.43 billion naira, and all of that was exchanged in 7,148 deals. FBN Holdings was the most traded stock by volume at 47.39 million units, while GT Bank was the most traded by value at 576.21 million naira. Now, the banking sector declined 2.79% yesterday, and that was due to declines from Tier 1 lenders. Consumer goods declined 0.07%. Industrial goods, on the other hand, gained by 0.23%, and that was due to gains from Dangote Cement and QTix. Insurance gained 1.16%, while oil and gas declined 0.63%. As you can see on the energy market, there were like a lot of the stocks that were unchanged. Owando declined, but on the other hand, Eternal Oil gained yesterday. That stock has been seeing gains in the last few trading sessions. We would find out what is really going on the market. But let's talk to Rotimi Fakaijo, a capital market analyst, for more. Good morning, Rotimi. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning, Young.
What do traders make of the CBN's MPC decision to cut MPR to 12.5%, and how much of an upside does that give to the stock market?
Well, we know, everyone knows that the gain of the capital market, the gain of the market most times result from the loss of the money market. With what we have seen so far, I think we're going to have more economic activities being stimulated by this reduction in the NPR. And also, when we have it such like that, definitely we have an increase in the flow of funds into the equity market. So we expect that that will begin to trickle down, and it's going to be a real upside in terms of prices and also volume for stocks in the equity market. So with what we have seen, I believe definitely this development we engender is what everyone has been crying for over the months and quarters. But with this happening right now, it's definitely going to engender more economic activities within the system, having a reduced cost of funds, and definitely an implied all other potentials that will be harnessed within the system.
Okay, the banks were the major losers in the key benchmark indices yesterday. Was that as a result of profit taking or something else?
Well, I think if you look at the activities on Wednesday, it was quite on the upside. And it was even more significant than what anyone would have expected, with most of the banking sector stocks gaining as much as 7 to 10%. So with what we saw yesterday, I think if an investor gains between 7 to 10% within 24 hours, there's every tendency that the person may want to at least realize those profits. So that is to the extent of what happened yesterday. But I want to believe strongly that with what the indications that we are seeing this morning, indicators are really showing us that things are definitely going to turn out better today. And we are with the price of Dangote Cement at this time having marked down for dividend on Wednesday. I think definitely that also will add value as we see more transactions in that particular stock and sector.
Well, we'll hope for a positive trading day today. But what's your outlook for next week?
Well, I think with what the outcome of the MPC meeting has been very much envisaged, and I think with what we have seen, I see a positive outlook for next week, except if we have another downward trend in the price of crude oil. But if that is not, then definitely we may have next week be much better than this week. Knowing fully well that this week only traded for 3 days. But next week, I believe we're going to have it much better than we did this week. So we have a lot of good and positive expectations.
Well, thank you for your input, Rotimi Fakaijo. He's a capital market analyst. Well, we'll move over with the market review, investors at the unlisted securities market took advantage of lower price stocks. As that side of the market has seen declines in previous trading sessions. But yesterday, the index rose 1.66% to 690.75 points, while the market cap increased to 507.40 billion naira. Total volume surged by over 300% to 170.06 million units, worth 2.32 billion naira, and all of that was traded in 8 deals. Moving to the fixed income market now. The trading at the bond market started yesterday's session on a relatively quiet note as attention was skewed towards the MPC meeting. But towards the end of the session, activity improved slightly with demand seen across the board, particularly on the FGN for 2049's, maturity. But that's it on the market review. Over to you, BC.
Let's see if things will actually turn out for the better today, just like Rotimi Fakejo said. Thanks, Adidian. Well, we'll check out today's business headlines coming from London as well as the debt and equities markets when we return in just a moment. Please stay with us. Let's now join Juliana Olayinka for the latest headlines coming from the UK this morning. Good morning, Juliana. It's good to see you. Now, more lockdown easing announced by the Prime Minister. Of course, a group of up to 6 people from different households will be able to meet outside in England from Monday. How welcoming is this?
Good morning, Bissy. I think it's safe to say that it's immensely welcomed after way over 2 months of a lockdown. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has said that England have successfully underscored all of the 5 tests to contain the virus. And yes, from Monday, we are able to have garden parties and barbecues and meet with larger crowds outside. At the moment, the government is saying this is just 6 people, I believe 6 additional people to the members of your household. But he was very careful and cautious about saying people shouldn't be so quick to meet people from different households all at once. We do know that a lot of car showrooms and other non-essential businesses will be open from June the 1st, and that will be further extended on June the 15th when we'll start to see retail stores open. There wasn't any word yet on hairdressers and bars, and they're really desperate to get their doors open again. We're expecting that to be sometime in July. But yes, this is good news, although considering Britain has been described as being one of the most coronaphobia countries on earth, we're not expecting there to be a rush, but certainly some people will definitely be putting burgers and sausages on their barbecue from Monday afternoon.
I can imagine that, Juliana. But at the same time, the government will start tapering its furlough scheme from August by forcing employers taking part to pay 20% of workers' wages as well as covering their national insurance and pension contributions. So it looks like government is beginning to realize the spiraling cost of the stimulus packages, right?
Absolutely. Well, and they're certainly seeing that it cannot go on indefinitely. Already, the Chancellor has extended the scheme. The scheme officially was to end at the end of May. It's been extended until the end of October. And until the end of July, it will remain the way it is, which is the government subsidising employees' wages of up to 80%. So at the moment, they're paying the wages of over 8 million people across the country. We're expecting an announcement from the Chancellor today. And what we're expecting is that from the start of August, the government will be paying 60%, and it will be mandatory for your employer to pay, if not the entire 40%, they'll have to pay 20%. Now, it's already cost the government £15 billion. It's expected to cost them in total £80 billion, which is why I believe they've been doing their rounds on the media this morning, just letting the public know that it cannot continue for much longer. But of course, there have been some concerns. According to the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, they've been speaking to some employers, and 1 in 4 say that they're just not able to fund their employers' wages, even if they are getting their businesses up and running again. So there are major concerns that once the scheme does stop, then there could be thousands, if not millions, of redundancies, as we've seen with some of the major airlines who are furloughing their staff, but have still announced thousands of job cuts.
Let's talk about data showing that the British car industry produced just 197 cars last month in April. Of course, that is because of the coronavirus. What was the UK car industry production capacity like before the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, I can tell you it's a lot higher than that, Bissy. Typically in a month, you'd expect 400,000 cars to be produced. So the fact that it was just 197 cars is completely shocking, but totally expected. That's a decrease of 99.7%. So practically nothing was created. Apparently, its cost to the industry is about £1.2 billion worth of losses, which is really serious. But on the other hand, a lot of these companies have been speaking out and they have repurposed a lot of their production plants. So a lot of car manufacturers have instead been making personal protective equipment. They've been making medical equipment and also some really advanced breathing capabilities for the NHS. And actually, they've been shipping many of these systems across the world. So they have been kept rather busy, but car plants have reopened again, so we're hoping that there will be a tick up in May. It won't be like it was before. In fact, I believe industry bosses reckon that only 1.2 million cars will be manufactured here in the UK, but it's a huge loss, but nothing that the industry wasn't expecting.
Thank you, Juliana. I know you have a few more crossings before you call it, or before you begin the weekend in full, but do enjoy your weekend, Juliana. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you.
And let's turn to the debt and currencies market back home, and we'll bring in Ifeoma Onyejekwe, a fixed income trader at UBA. Good morning, Ifeoma. So it came as a surprise to many that the CBN MPC reduced the MPR yesterday by 100 basis points. What sort of effects is that likely to have on the debt market yields?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. This change in the monetary policy rate would likely shift focus from the Treasury bills market to the bond market, made worse by the limited supply of Treasury bills, both the NCB and OMO bills. So the bond market would likely start trading as a premium as yields drop. Hence, the bond holders in the secondary market will be able to sell profitably. However, the market views this 100 basis point reduction in MPR as a cosmetic reaction at its best. So this reaction is not weighty enough to trigger a real jump in the economy, as the expectation of 100 basis points would have created more impact.
We actually understand that the CBN carried out an OMO auction yesterday. How successful was that outing?
It was very successful, very oversubscribed. Compared to the 160 billion that they offered, 104 billion sales was made. And we also saw a steep reduction in the stop rate to 7% from 11.5% on the short tenor maturity, 8.75% from 11.54% on the medium tenor bill, and 9.9% from 12.64% on the longer tenor maturity. And we'll have to note that since the 23rd of April, this is the first time that the central bank allocated all bills on all tenors offered.
The bond market was largely quiet yesterday as markets focused on the CBN's MPC meeting. And now that the MPR has been reduced, how much of a demand can we expect today?
We will expect more demand. The market has begun trading on a quiet note. However, we expect that during the trading day, offers should pick up, especially on the option bonds. That's the 2023, 2035, and the 2050 bonds.
And then the Treasury bills markets now it also saw a bit of improvement yesterday, seeing a bit of demand, especially on the newly issued 182-day maturity. Any idea what is fueling that interest?
So the traders in the market, they expect decreasing rates because, as we see yesterday, the stop rates at the OMO auction saw a steep reduction. And we also expect that the rate will continue to decline. So people would like to pick as much as they can while the rate remain relatively attracted owing to a declining rate in coming weeks.
Fixed income trader at UBA, Ifeoma Onyejekwe, thanks for speaking with us. And that's where we wrap up today's program. Thank you for watching. I am Bisi Adebayo.